Good evening, everyone. May we start this evening's planning committee? I know there's a number of people in the auditorium. Shush, 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 shush. Could
Quiet, please.
come on? Yeah, right. Thank you. I need first of all to read out a script. Can I remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live via the internet, and this record is archived for future viewing. So there are shots of the public gallery and of the planning committee, so please be warned. Thank you. Straight into the agenda then. Could I take any apologies for absence? I know we've got Howard Hamilton who sent me apologies. Are there any others? No? Thank you. The minutes of the last meeting, can somebody move them as a true record? Councillor Bird, Val Artery. She had her arm in the air. Okay, thank you. To receive declarations of interest under the Council's Code of Conduct. I know there are some people who want to declare an interest. So we've got two. Shall we start with Nick Hodges?
Thank you, Chairman. On the planning applications, Agenda 9, page 91, 2016/00219 full, United Reformed Church, Windsor Road, Barry. I've been a resident of Lower Romney Road for 15 years. I have no dispensation. I can't have a dispensation. I won't speak, and I certainly won't be voting. I will leave the room.
Thank you for that. Councillor Anthony Powell.
Thank you, Chair. It's exactly the same item. I will be declaring an interest. I won't be taking part. I will be leaving the room. And that is due to the fact that I am the client of a person who has an interest in this particular application.
Okay, thank you for that. No other member? Okay, thank you. Audrey? Sorry, Audrey. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Noted. Right, we'll move swiftly on into the agenda. Agenda item 4 is site inspections. Anything to add to those, Marcus?
Nothing to add, Chair.
There we are. Move we note?
Yeah.
All happy? Thank you. Agenda item 5 is building regulation applications other than control matters determined by the Head of Regeneration and Planning under his delegated powers, which is on page 1. Anything to add, Marcus?
No, Chair, nothing to add.
Move we note?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 6 is planning applications determined by the Head of Regeneration and Planning under his delegated powers, which can be found on page 23. Members, move we note?
Yeah.
Thank you. Agenda item 7 is appeals, which is on page 43. Anything to raise on those, Marcus?
No, Chair, nothing to add unless there are any questions regarding any.
You've got the report. We've had it for 7 days. We've looked at it. Anybody want to raise anything on the appeals? Move we note? Thank you. Agenda item 8, which is trees, and the little I on the delegated list, which can be found on page 54. Anything to add, Marcus?
No, Chair, nothing to add.
Move we note?
Yeah.
Okay, happy. Thank you. Into planning applications in full. So we've got the first one on there, land at Rectory Road in Wenvo. I think that's a small development by the current builder that's building up there. That's up to be found on page 56. Marcus, would you like to lead us through that report?
Vicky is going to lead us through.
Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm that there are a couple of late reps on this item, both of which are from Redrow, who are the applicant for this development, both submitting additional details that would have been controlled by condition. The one in respect of the construction management plan, there's no change to the condition there. We'll just need to consult on that matter before we can agree those details. The additional information on the trees, however, does lead to a proposed amendment to condition 10, just to agree that the development gets carried out in accordance with those details. So this application is for 12 dwellings in what would have been the garden of the property known as the Rectory. In terms of planning policy context, it's within the settlement boundary for Wenvo. However, this essentially is an extension to the Redrow development known as the Grange. So Redrow have obviously acquired this land. The access will be from the new development. The house types are very similar to the existing development at the Grange, so it'll be a sort of small extension to that development that's currently under construction. The full details are obviously set out in the report. There are some Section 106 requirements, so the recommendation is for approval subject to a Section 106 agreement securing, amongst other things, affordable housing, education, facility and school transport contributions, open space contributions and sustainable transport contributions, and, community facilities contributions, all set out on page 77 of the officer's report.
Thank you for that. Local member, Jonathan Bird.
Thank you, Chair. Very disappointed in this, really. I think it's gross overdevelopment of the site. Very small gardens for quite reasonable sized houses. I don't think it's in character. I've got concerns over the overlooking. I know the report says not, but I'm just disappointed in all. I think it could have been done a lot more sympathetically, and I will be voting against it.
Thank you. Any other member? No? Okay. Somebody would like to move something?
Move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. And seconded by Bromley and Books. Okay, those in favour of the officer's recommendation, please show. Okay, those against. Okay, any abstentions? No, that's clearly carried then. Thank you. Moving on then, we've got subject to a site visit this afternoon or this morning, and there are a number of late representations before us that we need to read. So we're moving on to the United Reformed Church on Windsor Road in Barry, and I'll ask the officers to lead us through the report. We've got two members who've left the room, so...
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, if I can go through the late representations received, we have comments from Andrew R.T. Davis, AM, making us aware of the concerns and comments that he's received from residents in the area. An objection from Councillor Rona Probert, largely dealing with the issue of parking, which no doubt we will discuss in some detail. An objection from Councillor Richard Burton, also addressing concerns about parking. Comments from the planning agent, which have led to suggested amendments to conditions 3 and 9 in respect of allowing B1 uses for offices in addition to A1 uses. And finally, the letters of objection from neighbouring properties, including the wraparound group, which have been covered quite extensively in the officer's report and are attached as late representations as well for members to consider. If I can just quickly outline what the proposed development is for, and then I'm sure we'll have a very healthy debate and questions about the matters arising from this development. So the proposal is to convert the existing church building and the Sunday school buildings on the site to provide for 22 residential units comprising a number of two-bed flats, and 2 and 3 bed townhouses. Some 550 square metres of A2 office use on the ground floor of the existing church building, and some further office accommodation towards the rear of the site to serve as the live-work units as part of the residential conversion. There are limited alterations to the building itself in terms of external alterations, some small changes to the lean-to roofs on either side of the church building, and insertion of Velux windows and changes to windows and doors of the existing building. But there's limited changes in terms of extensions and so on. The main issue, which has been brought to everybody's attention, is the parking. There is no on-site parking provision proposed as part of the development. So the development has been supported by additional information in relation to parking surveys. The report does detail at length the findings of those surveys and the officer's analysis of those surveys in relation to the established and existing use of the building and the proposed use, the availability of on-street parking and so on, which I'm sure we will debate at length. So I won't sort of talk too much about that at this stage. That's okay.
Okay then, there we have it. I think we've got 2 people to want to speak to the committee, and they're objecting to the scheme. One objector. Yeah, 1 for, 1 against. So the person who's against is Mr. Lawrence Blight. Would you like to take the hot seat up there, Mr. Blight? Thank you. You've got 3 minutes, Mr. Blight, to address the committee, and your 3 minutes will start when you're ready. So take your time. Yes, fine. You will need to turn your mic on when you're ready. Yes, it is. Then everybody will hear you.
Our densely populated residential community has welcomed newcomers and previous developments, but we object to this development because it provides no on-site parking. We are also concerned about road safety. Existing and ongoing developments have designated parking insufficient for their needs. Planning was granted with the expectation that these properties would utilise any parking slack in the surrounding area. There is no longer any slack. Residents currently experience significant parking stress. The wraparound website shows pictures of the density of parking we frequently experience. The railway station car park is saturated. Increasingly, people are parking on our roads before commuting by train. Highways confirm there is no space at peak times. This is before they implement additional parking restrictions. Even if you agree with the developer's parking need assessment of only 38 vehicles, the application proposes none. The Welsh Assembly's requirements on social sustainability judge a proposal fails if it encourages new residents to act in an antisocial manner by blocking driveways, parking on double yellow lines, or making excessive use of local facilities in a manner that prevents or inhibits existing residents from using them. To show more curbside capacity than exists, the developer's diagrams showed the vehicles of newcomers doing all these things in breach of the highway code. The proposal fails to meet the Welsh Assembly social sustainability criteria. TAN 18 Transport states, greater weight should be given to the potential adverse impacts likely to result from on-street parking when the design and layout of the street is unlikely to satisfactorily cope with additional residential parking pressures. An application only 100 metres from the URC was refused, and I quote, because the introduction of this commercial use into a primarily residential area where the resulting traffic generation, vehicle movements and on-street parking would have an unacceptable impact on the amenity and character of the residential area and would be detrimental to highway safety. Planning guidelines may have evolved, but none of these elements have altered. Traffic flow is greater and we are more densely populated. Vehicle movements would be increased and the streets even more unlikely to cope due to the greater size of the proposed development. A refusal where only 2 spaces were required said, the principle of a zero parking provision would establish an unacceptable precedent, contrary to the Council's parking guidelines. To generate a demand for 38 parking spaces but provide none is selfish and unacceptable and would surely establish an unacceptable precedent. Wraparound has submitted detailed evidence-based objections, as have well over 200 individuals, together with Barry Town Council and Romney School governors.
Can you
all
wrap
of
it
the
up?
wraparound community ask you to reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well spoken. Yeah. Is there any councillor like to raise any points of clarification? Not questions, clarification. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
No, go on.
Okay, thank you. I've got a number of points of clarification I'd like to ask. I'll ask one at a time, if that's okay,
Yes,
Chair.
fine.
Good evening. You've made great reference to planning, to parking. Can you tell me what possible impact the additional cars will have on
Yeah,
parents?
that's a question.
All right.
You're asking him for an impact.
In your view, what would be the impact on Romley School?
It's still a question.
I think the school was mentioned in his comments, Chair.
It is a question, though. It's a points of clarification out of what is said.
Right. Can you clarify the impact?
Yes, I can. Romley School has...
Turn off your mic.
Am I okay now? Thank
Yes, you are now.
Romley School, there are effects on a number of the roads in our area: Upper Romley Road, Porthkerry Road, Claude Road, Jenner Road, Pontypridd Road, and all the terraced roads going down the hill on Park Crescent down to Glamorgan Street are all affected by Romley Schools. I think I should also say that the roads around the United Reformed Church are on the route also to barracks, to St Barracks and to High Street School. We're really pleased that the Vale has decided to put in a pedestrian crossing and to put in addition, double yellow lines. That's great news. Much to be welcomed because it will improve safety for children and parents taking them to school. However, the impact on this, and part of our objection is, it will significantly reduce car parking space and mean that there's even less than has been described in the developers' submissions.
Thank you. Yeah, clarification.
Thank you. Another point of clarification. Could you clarify your comments regarding the impact of the business element of this application?
Yes, obviously as a community we're aware the church is empty and it has to be used for something, and in principle we welcome the use of the church for business use. However, needless to say, the impact of having a business there is going to be that the finite parking, which isn't sufficient at peak times, will be further compromised by the business use. And frankly, if businesses come there, then presumably they're coming there to thrive and to grow. And if they grow, that will create even more problems for the community as time goes along. There is there isn't sufficient parking, and business use will exacerbate the problem.
Another point of clarification. Could you clarify your comments regarding the lack of on-site parking at this site?
Yes, it seems to us as a group who are just local residents who are amateur to this, have never been involved in this before, this sort of thing before, we find it incredibly strange that when for instance, the property next door was developed, when we first got there, it was a scout hut. When it was developed into the Romley Court, on-site parking was put in front of Romley Court, and we don't understand why on-site parking can't be put onto this site. To not put on-site parking is going to put enormous stress on the rest of the roads in the area.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to ask a point of clarification? Okay, I'm going to ask the local... You may step down now. Thank you. I'm going to ask for the councillor to join us, who's indicated he wants to speak. He's the local member.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
I've come here to speak as the local member for the ward and to voice my objection, my very strong objection to this application. And it's an objection on two grounds, privacy and parking. As the application stands, many properties would be overlooked by this proposed development. They would be less than the required distance away from Romley Court and Windsor Road. Now, although this might be able to be resolved as an imposition of conditions for the application, there is another part to this which I don't think can be resolved by just imposing conditions, and that is, of course, the parking. Now, this is an area already suffering from the fact that demand for parking exceeds availability. The lack of any, and remember that, any on-site parking in this application would therefore greatly exacerbate an existing problem. The build-up of cars and people trying to find preciously rare parking spaces would also cause further additional hazards for road users. You know, things like the free flow of traffic, safety for pedestrians, cyclists and other cars and other vehicles. This application indeed is contrary to this council's own UDP and policy as stated in Tram 10 and also last year's supplementary guidance to parking standards. In that guidance, the council's own criteria and formula clearly shows that there would be nowhere near the amount of parking spaces available compared to those needed. Now, tonight I'm sure that we're going to hear a lot of numbers bandied around, but the reality of the situation is that this is not an application that's short of parking spaces by 1, 2, half a dozen spaces. The point is it's short by masses more than that. This is woefully short. This is a massive amount. So no tinkering around the edges in this application is suddenly going to make this application a feasible, viable one. This is nowhere near satisfying the parking needs that it will generate. Now, this application, again, I remind you, does not have a single on-site car space. And if we therefore allow this, it'll set a very dangerous precedent that will arrogantly ride roughshod over our best attempts at planning sustainable communities. But it gets worse. As mentioned earlier, if one adds to this the number of spaces that will be lost as a result of the pedestrian crossing that is much needed between both sides of Porthkerry Road and the double yellows on Windsor Road and Porthkerry Road, then of course that dramatically reduces the number of parking spaces available yet again. Another strain on capacity. And Porthkerry Road and Windsor Road form what is not only just a very busy route through Barry, it is of course, as has been mentioned, a route for children going to school. Not just High Street and St Barrack, but Romley School, the biggest primary school in Wales, which if you include the nursery, is talking something not short of about 800 pupils. So, as a result of both of these issues of privacy and especially parking, this application fails to conform to the criteria as set by this council for new developments, as stated in ENV 27, and therefore no amount of tinkering can ever mitigate or satisfy it, which is why this application must be refused on these grounds. Thank you.
Thank you. Another local member, Councillor Rona Probert. Yeah, can you turn your mic off? Yeah, lovely. Thank you. 3 minutes when you press the button.
It's good to allow housing and some office space at this site, but I disagree with the absence of any parking provision at all. One reason given for allowing the development is that it would maintain an important building, but this is not the overwhelming consideration, as there should always be a balance of factors, and it is important not to disadvantage local residents. It seems the parking policy, while there are no minimum requirements for parking, the policy is in disarray because there's no minimum requirements, as I say, but there are still guidelines recommending appropriate levels of parking. And the change to the policy came from Welsh Government. It's not this council's fault that the policy is unclear. However, we need to try and maintain consistency in our decisions for the benefit of everyone. So I've researched the applications for similar residential developments to see what parking levels were required by the inspector and or this committee. Across the road is the nearest, at the Porthcurry Methodist Church, which you saw this morning, across the way from you. 11 residential units were provided with 11 parking spaces. So parking was required for a residential development in a former church close to the URC, and the appropriate level was deemed to be 1 space per unit. And it was stated in the planning decision that substantial increase in demand for parking could be a reason to refuse planning consent. Opposite URC again is the Mount Sorrel Hotel, and this committee has approved outline residential development for 34 units with 32 parking spaces, though 22 were considered to be sufficient, but with scope to increase that number with a full planning application. At the other end of Windsor Road is the Barry Hotel development. The planning inspector saw that there is a requirement for parking with the development in this location, even though there is good access to public transport. Further afield in Barry, but also in a sustainable location, is the Barry Conservative Club. It's a development for 21 apartments, and the requirement was for 15 parking spaces. The highway engineer, in fact, requested 1 parking space per flat as desirable, even though it's in a sustainable location. Its previous use had parking demand, and a lower level of car ownership was expected for affordable housing tenants. So I ask that the planning committee compare these developments with what is proposed for the URC. 22 residential units, none of which are affordable, office space for up to 80 workers.
Can you wrap it up?
According to our parking standards, this should require 37 residential and 16 office spaces, 38 parking spaces. It gets reduced because it's in a sustainable location. This is a much larger scale development, but the recommendation with regard to parking is vastly different and inconsistent in comparison.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I understand we've got Mr. John Hurley who's going to speak for the development. Same things, Mr. Hurley. It's 3 minutes, and your 3 minutes start when you want to begin.
Thank you, Chair. Before turning to address the issues that have been raised, in order to demonstrate they have been adequately considered, there are a number of significant benefits that we've brought about through the proposals which need to be highlighted. The scheme is located on a brownfield site in a highly sustainable location. It is a genuinely mixed-use proposal which is supported by a raft of planning policies at both the national and local level, and as a result has been recommended for approval by officers. The church is a county treasure and is a building at risk. Whilst the buildings are in need of significant repair, it is still economically viable for it to be converted before it worsens in condition. The proposed scheme has to be viewed within that context, not least as it would generate revenue for both the immediate restoration of the buildings, but also through the appointment of a management company which will be responsible for their long-term upkeep. The authority had previously refused planning applications in 2006 and 2008 which proposed the demolition of the church. The beneficial conversion of the church is therefore supported by the authority's officers, as it will preserve a local historic landmark. In terms of car parking, an independent parking survey has been undertaken, and this demonstrates that there are ample spare parking spaces within the area available to accommodate the development. This was clearly visible at the site visit this morning. The committee report also confirms that both planning and highway officers have categorically stated that there is no justification to support a refusal on parking grounds. They have also stated that the site is highly accessible by all modes of transport, with a regular bus service, railway station, shops and services all within walking distance of the site. As we saw on the site visit, as the proposed development retains the church and associated buildings, officers have stated that it will be impractical to provide parking on the site without an objection being raised by highway officers. The applicant has a proven track record in delivering similar schemes locally, such as the conversion of the historic pump house in Barry, and is also signed up to Help to Buy, which will give assistance to first-time buyers to get on the property ladder. Also, local firms and contractors will be used in the redevelopment of the building, ensuring that the economic benefits of the scheme are attained locally. The proposed redevelopment of the church represents a distinct regeneration opportunity which will secure the future of a county treasure. Thank you for your time, and we respectfully request that the application is approved in line with officer recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. You had another 14 seconds, but right, any member would like to ask some points of clarification? Ms. Councillor Franks.
You make reference to the independent parking survey. Could you clarify what the survey stated regarding the impact on parents parking at Romley School?
A survey company, as we've heard, was being appointed to carry out a parking survey. This was carried out on 4 separate days, 2 in March and 2 in May. They've gone around the surrounding streets and they've calculated the total area that is available for parking. They have then recorded instances every quarter of an hour whilst the survey was being undertaken where cars could park. They have then subtracted those cars off the total available amount of parking that is available, and the report concludes that there is ample space available to support the development. The report was undertaken during the weekday and during term time. It was undertaken on a Wednesday and a Thursday, as well as 2 separate Saturdays. When it was undertaken on a Wednesday, parking surveys were undertaken during school times in terms of drop-off and pick-up. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Franks.
Thank you. Another point of clarification relating to this this survey. Can you indicate what the survey states regarding the impact that the business element will have on the local surroundings?
Well, I think I can clarify that not just in reference back to the parking surveys, but actually back to the committee report itself. As I've mentioned in my speech, this is a mixed-use proposal which doesn't just provide 22 live-work residential units, but also an element of office floor space. Officers have recognised within the report, that's planning and highway officers, that there will be a distinction between when there is a parking pressure brought about by the proposal. For instance, it would be greater in the first thing in the morning, at the end of the day, with regards to the residential units, and it would be, and then people obviously leaving and coming back from work, and then obviously in the daytime, the spaces that are available can be used by the office use.
Could we stop shouting out, please?
So in that respect, highway and planning officers have considered that the proposal is acceptable with regards to the parking situation in the area.
Thank you. Another point of clarification relating to this independent parking report. Can you clarify what the report says regarding the lack of on-site parking?
With regards to on-site parking, as we saw on the site visit today, it is not possible to provide parking on site. As I referred to earlier, applications in 2006 and 2008 proposed the demolition of the church. It was specifically stated by highway officers at the time of those applications that, for For instance, if the existing buildings were to be retained on the site, the access could not physically be provided in line with highway authority requirements. That's a specific quote from the committee report from the 2008 application. Highway officers have only said that parking could be provided if demolition of the buildings was sought. So we're in a position here where the authority have resisted the demolition of the building. We're proposing to reuse the building, but ultimately there is this parking issue. So in that respect, you know, there's the past precedent with regard to not being able to provide parking as part of previous planning applications. And also, as we saw on site today, there isn't any opportunity in terms of the access that we walked up on part of the site visit from Windsor Road. That's not suitable with regard to visibility displays, and it also then doesn't provide an area, provide an access into the site itself to provide car parking. I think an issue we have discussed is whether parking could be provided directly from Romley Road, i.e., you know, parking spaces created as they are for the properties slightly to the south of the church. The issue with that is the engineering operation that you'd need to undertake to provide off-street car parking would be a significant expenditure. Whilst you also have to undertake that engineering operation, you're also then taking away parking spaces that are on street, because people wouldn't be able to park in the spaces that are there because they'd be blocking up people's parking spaces. Is that sufficient?
My last
Okay.
not question, point of clarification. Could you go into a bit more detail regarding the work/let activities that you anticipate? Can you say what type of businesses will be attracted to that area?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, with regard to the live-work element of the scheme, it has the ability to be used for a residential property or also for a live-work type unit. It's similar to what we've what's been proposed and delivered in the pump house in Barry. Now, these units can be used, as I said, for residential or live-work, and because you have that flexibility in use, that will accordingly have less of an impact upon potential parking pressures. Through providing live-work units, as I said, they could be used for a range of uses. So, for instance, if it's residential, people will be leaving in the morning and coming back in the evening if they did have a car. If they were used for office use, people would be coming along in the morning at, say, 9 o'clock after the people have left for work at 8:30 in the morning. So there's that flexibility actually aids the situation with regard to the parking requirement.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gwyn Roberts, please.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I can well see the intention of this, and it's a laudable aim to do it. And the whole problem is one issue, isn't it? It's car parking. I think the whole of the residents' objections are to the car parking problems in the area, so that's what we need to look at. Now, you've just explained, so in a way, Councillor Frank's clarification partly answered my question, but it seems to me, I was at the site visit this morning, that the church is a very significant building in Barry that should be preserved, and I don't think anybody would want to see that demolished. But some of the adjacent buildings or separate buildings are less significant. And what I haven't heard is whether or not any consideration has been given to actually perhaps removing some of the buildings other than the main church and allowing parking that way. Now, has that been considered?
Yeah, it is a question. Yeah, it is a question. It's not out of what he said, is it? So, yeah.
We can debate that after.
Do you think you're capable of answering that?
Well, hopefully I'm capable of answering that. Yes, you know, the site's constructed, as you can see on the screen, from two parts which are closely related. We've got the church itself and the Sunday school building to the rear. Now, the topography, as you can see, slopes up significantly along Porthcurry Road. That's the on the top image is the image from Porthcurry Road. There isn't the ability to provide car parking as we've heard from Windsor Road in terms of the existing access, which is adjacent to the church. But if you were coming from Romley Road, you'd have to have quite a significant engineering operation to take out that the Sunday school buildings to provide a deck car park towards the rear. The land slope is significantly slopes. This also has to be considered in the context that this is a county treasure, and whilst not listed, it is only viable with regards to the level of development that that has been put forward. We've submitted a viability assessment to demonstrate that, and that's been signed off by the authorities' officers. So it wouldn't be viable economically, and not being an engineer, I can only propose that it probably would be difficult to provide an engineering solution to provide car parking on site.
Okay. Right. I've got Councillor Jeff James next.
Thank you, Chairman. Really, I'm following on what Councillor Roberts asked, really. I think you probably answered it, but clearly the main objections, has been said, is the lack of parking. Is there a reason, can you clarify why you chose not to demolish any of the buildings, and the rationale for the development coming forward as it is, without any car parking of any significance on the site?
Well, I think in terms of the clarification that I just provided, then I think that the viability and engineering issues are obviously paramount. But also, there's references within the committee report itself that we wouldn't want to be demolishing whether the church, let alone the Sunday school buildings, because they're important to the street scheme and historic context of the area.
Okay.
And applications have previously been submitted to demolish the buildings have been refused by the authority.
Okay, Councillor Andrew Parker.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask Vicky if she could put up the drawing perspective 2, which is the one looking down the road, Romilly Road?
The one we were looking at on site.
We've got more plans on the screen tonight.
That's it. That's it. Yeah. That's it. Thank you. In clarification, really, forgetting the expense of providing car parking, but the only place you could provide parking would be to remove the car parking to the right, which you can't see where the two people are, and obviously carry out the engineering operation. In clarification, have you actually worked out the loss of the car parking along Romilly Road, which may be 7 or 8 in my guess, and a gain of maybe 15 to 20 if you did the engineering operation? Have you considered that? Oh, sorry.
As I mentioned earlier, if you were to provide car parking directly off the road in this area, notwithstanding the engineering and the economic issues which we've discussed, you would, as you say, be taking car parking away on street. And the balance, therefore, of the expense of providing that, the impact then upon the actual the townhouses that you see there in terms of reduction of light and an outlook, I think that would actually create more planning issues than than the position that we're currently in. If we were to remove what is amenity space for the houses, I'm sure we would fall foul of the council's amenity space requirements, which were discussed earlier in the first application, in terms of size of gardens relevant to the houses. So in that respect, I think where we are is acceptable.
Okay. Councillor John Drysdale.
Thank you. Is it possible that the live-work units could actually have other employees working in them besides the person that's actually resident in the unit? Or is there some form of restriction on that? Similarly, would there be any form of restriction on visitors, business visitors, coming to the unit? And I have another question after that. Clarification.
Question, please.
With regards to that, so there isn't any limit on how many people could use the live-work unit. It's actually similar to how many people might actually live in the properties if they're used on a residential basis. It could be that a 3-bedroom townhouse was only occupied by a couple.
So the answer is no restrictions, and there could be other people coming in and out. Okay, the second question is...
Not question, please.
Sorry, clarification is, there seems to be a confusion that at one and the same time, the expectation is that the people in the live-work units, because they've got a work unit, might stay at home, and in my view, they probably will have cars, and those cars will stay on the street during the day, and yet elsewhere there are comments to say that the people in the live-work units will be going away during the daytime, and so there won't be so much parking demand on the streets roundabout during the daytime. Which is it?
Well, as I said, you know, earlier, if the units are used on a residential basis, if people did have a car, which they potentially might not because it is a sustainable location close to services, bus stops and railway stations, they would take their car away, wouldn't they? If then in the evening they would then bring it back, you know, there would be that flexibility with regard to live-work units, in the sense that if they are used for residential and they did have a car and they did drive that to work, that car wouldn't be there in the daytime. So if it was used for an employment use, there would be that potential then in the daytime for people to park.
Okay, is that it for Mr. Hurley? Would you like to step down, Mr. Hurley? Thank you. Right, Jonathan, did you want to ask Mr. Hurley something? No, well, it's not time for the debate yet, unfortunately. It's the officer's opportunity now to come back on some of the people who spoke and to clarify matters. Okay? Thank you. Is it you, Victoria?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Just to confirm and pick up on a couple of the issues that have been raised. Firstly, just in respect of Councillor's comments about privacy, you did acknowledge that those matters have been dealt with or can be dealt with by condition.
I said they could be dealt with, but the conditions need to be quite stringent.
Yeah, well, the officer's report does actually deal with those matters in terms of overlooking and obscure glazing, and so I think it's fair to say that those matters have been covered satisfactorily. I think the main issue everyone probably realises is the parking issue, and I think you'll all agree that the officer's report does explain in some detail all of the issues that have been taken into account in that regard. Firstly, the availability of parking on street, given that there is no on-site parking provided. And I think it's very clear from the officer's report and the presentations that you've heard from both sides that there is a parking problem in the area, that there is a shortage of parking at certain times of the day, particularly in the evenings, and that has been highlighted in the officer's report. And that is part of the planning balance and part of the consideration in terms of the merits of this application. What has been taken into account in that regard is not only the sort of policy shift towards maximum rather than minimum parking standards, and we've had quotes from our own SPG and parking standards, but it is clear that those parking standards are guidelines for developers as opposed to rigid parking guidelines that must be adhered to. National policy and our own policies make that clear, that actually they're the ideal, but they can't be treated as a minimum standard, particularly in locations such as this that are sustainable locations where there are alternatives to owning a private car. There are shops and facilities within walking distance. There are good public transport connections in the locality. So for all of those reasons, this is a location where you could live and you could choose to not own a car, and you would be able to access day-to-day facilities and goods and services. The other large factor which officers have balanced in the parking argument is the established use of the building as a church and the parking requirement that that has, and that is set out in the report. And essentially, this development is tantamount to a church in respect of the parking requirements. That is set out quite clearly in the report, where we have looked at the size of the existing church, the requirements of parking for that church use, and indeed other D2 uses that the building could be used for without the need for planning permission. So we can't ignore those factors, and it's for those reasons that the highway officers have not objected to the application on the grounds of parking. The other factor weighing heavily in favour of the approval of this application is the effective reuse of a brownfield site and, importantly, a county treasure. We've heard about the previous refusals of applications to demolish the existing building and reuse the site for residential development some years ago. There is a concern that we won't find an appropriate alternative use for this important local building. This use has been put forward. It is a viable use of the building, and it has merit. It does have potential impacts in terms of parking, and I think officers have been quite open in acknowledging that. But on balance, we feel that this is an appropriate use for reuse of the building and the site, and one which does have some merit in planning terms, hence the reason for recommending approval of the site.
Thank you for that. Okay, now's the opportunity to open up the debate. Jonathan Bird and then John Drysdale.
Thank you, Chair. Right, I fully sympathise with this building and would hate to see it demolished, and I understand there are viability issues and all that, but parking, to provide no parking for 22 residential units, some may choose not to have a car. I think the majority probably will have a car, so I think we're kidding ourselves if we think 22 residential units are not going to have any cars. I think there needs to be a compromise here, and I think some parking can be given on site. I know it's not going to be a cheap option. There are various options, as we've talked, along the top of the site, possibly a little bit of terracing work and some end-on car parking, which would probably give you a net gain of 10 to a dozen car parking spaces, or the demolition of part of the Sunday school or all of the Sunday school building, and maybe a multi-layered car parking option that you could come in at any level off the road, again giving some car parking. I just feel that no car parking is a very big ask for such a development, and the Sunday school buildings are not as important, I feel, as the main church itself. Can I ask the officer about the Sunday school buildings and their history and any planning restrictions that would be on those for any demolishment, please?
The building itself is a whole, and it is a county treasure, so it's not statutorily protected, which is the first thing. It is a county treasure, it's protected by the council. The issue really is that the viability assessment has stacked up what can be provided against basically the return for the developer, and essentially that's been checked by our own estates department and looked at and assessed, and any additional works pretty much tip this over into the unviable category. So basically it ceases to become a viable proposition to convert. And I think what I would add just to put on that is that the developer who's put this application in obviously has a lot of experience in terms of developing and changing the use of older buildings like this. Probably more experience than anyone else in the area, given the number of buildings they have looked at and converted. So I know there is a general view that if you demolish perhaps the less attractive brick-built buildings at the back, you could get parking in there. I think officers looked at that long before the application was brought to you, and essentially the viability arguments destroy that, because you would have to, the works that would be necessary mean that the development wouldn't be viable.
Can I just ask a question?
Yes.
Chair, viability. It's a big thing, and surely viability comes down to the value of that church. Now, the value of that church currently is probably zero. Viability comes down to how much the site was paid for, and if somebody buys a site and pays too much money for a site, is that the council's problem, or is that the developer's problem? Because that's the way it seems to me, that they have over-egged the site. Oh, we can get away with this because of, we can say we've paid this for it, and the council will look at us and say, oh, sorry, you can't make any money. Well, I believe that should have been taken into account when it was first sold. The viability of the project should have been looked at when it was first sold, and that would be the way I would look at it. And even if the church had to be given away for a practically nominal fee, I don't hold with it, sorry, I'm afraid.
Do you want to come back on that, Marcus? Or Vicky?
Yeah, only just to confirm, when we scrutinise viability information, we take all those matters into account. So we won't just take a developer's word for it that a property or a premises is worth what they paid for it. You know, we use valuation expertise to ensure that the sort of scenario you've just described doesn't happen. When you're looking at historic buildings, there are costs that are so much more abnormal than any other greenfield site that's open to development. So in this case, it needs a certain quantum of development on the site in terms of sales values receipts to be achieved in order to just carry out works to the fabric of the historic building to enable it to be capable of conversion. So that's why in a scenario like this, just like it was in the church over the road that's been converted, viability really is at the marginal levels, and that's why the constraints of the site basically mean that if you're going to allow the reuse of the building to something that's a commercially viable prospect, then you're going to be at the limits of viability, and why factors that we're talking about, such as, you know, retaining walls and engineering matters at the rear of the site to provide parking, it's a very costly operation. Similarly, demolishing, you know, a number of the existing buildings which are being reused for a value, by losing that extra accommodation to provide parking, it is going to knock the scheme in terms of its viability and potentially mean that simply, you know, reusing the existing building becomes unviable.
Could I just, if you bear with me, could I just ask what your professional valuers valued that premises at? Because as I say, I believe it to be practically a zero value, and should have been gifted to the developer just to relieve them of the problem.
I don't have the information to hand. Even if I did, that's commercially sensitive information that I wouldn't be able to share in a public gallery arena. Members could be allowed to look at that privileged information as part of member privilege if you really felt it was necessary for the determination of the application.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Councillor John Drysdale.
Thank you, Chair. I want to ask a question of the officers, and then I want to make my comments about the parking issue. When we looked at the viability of the business case for the Dolphin Pub down next to the fairground, the business case viability was sent to the district valuer for examination. It doesn't seem to have been so this time, and I'm wondering why.
In this case, we sent it to our own in-house valuation experts in our estates department, and they were able to review the information, and our own building control engineers in terms of the construction details and so on, and they were satisfied with the level of information and were able to scrutinise it. Unfortunately, they don't always have the time and resources to do that for us on all applications that are subject to viability appraisals, which is why we do very often use the district valuer, but not always.
Chair, nobody wants to see this building demolished. You know, the principle everybody is happy with. Clearly parking is the issue. But the question before us is not, shall we knock down this building tonight? It is this particular development in front of us reasonable or not? Now, the Highways Department concludes that the development would not materially exceed demand that already exists. Now, I just disagree with that, and I think the rationale for that conclusion in the report is wrong in planning terms themselves, and I want to examine that. The detailed calculations of parking availability in the report from Highways, based on the appraisal by the developer, show that you can't park for 10% of the time during the week in this area and 42% of the time on a Saturday. Now, that's a different perspective on the figures from what you see in the report. It's the inverse of them. The report talks about the time that it's available. I think it's more significant to look at when is the area clogged up and saturated, and I think 10% and 42% quite significant figures. The report also notes that there's an increase in May over March, which may indicate that there is some kind of seasonal demand in that area, which perhaps wouldn't be surprising. More people going shopping or going out in the evening. So we really don't know what's going to happen in the rest of the months, summer, etc. But there's no doubt that this is actually an area under serious parking pressure, and I think it's understated in the report. The fallback consideration that's been mentioned is critical in the justification in the highways sort of conclusion. And fallback calculates the number of parking spaces for an existing permitted use, i.e. as a church, and says it's similar to the demand for the development that's proposed, and so it discounts the demand from the proposed development. But fallback is theoretical. If it actually was happening and we added it to the figures that's in the parking appraisal, then it would show that the streets were even more clogged up than the 10 and 42% that they actually have been shown to be. So fallback demand is theoretical, but the parking demand from this proposed development is anything but theoretical, and it will exceed the parking availability in the area substantially, and that's reality, not theory. The report doesn't say that we are only required to give the fallback consideration due weight. It's not that we must apply fallback. We should give it due weight, and in this case I think it should be given very little weight, because there's been no use on this site for an extended period, and the parking for a church use is different in nature anyway. It's sporadic and short term. I think we should stick to what is a practical basis for planning decisions, that developments have to mitigate their own adverse impacts. We shouldn't offset them with some kind of theoretical offset. And I believe that the proposed development and its parking requirements will make congestion much worse in the area. There's an Appendix D attached to the officer's report which gives the results of the parking survey, though adjusted for the mistakes that are in the developer's survey about the initial parking appraisal, counting crossovers and yellow lines, etc., and also allowing for future demand from developments that are in progress that will generate parking themselves. If you adjust those figures in Appendix D, which you won't be surprised I have done, with the 38 parking spaces that are mooted in the appraisal, then you find that this area is completely saturated for 50% of the daytime and almost the entire day on Saturday. We don't know about Sunday, but I suspect it won't be far different from a Saturday. And despite all of that, the view of the highways officers is that, quote, the proposed development would not worsen the existing situation in terms of parking. This is the triumph of theoretical calculation over reality, and it's just not correct. I've used the figures that are in the report so far, but the estimates in there, they're uncertain. I believe they're too low, and I want to look at why. The RAP parking assessment was more thorough in many ways than the one done by the developer. It interviewed residents and ascertained on a quite sizable sample that the average car ownership is 1.7 cars per dwelling. And remember, these are the same residents of the same highly sustainable area that we've been talking about, and downsizing the parking demand for the development because it's sustainable. At that level of car ownership, the demand would be 38 for the residential units and at least 20 for business and visitors, which would make the congestion even worse. I was going to ask about the possibility of parking on site, but I think that's been covered. But I just want to look briefly at the area we're talking about where this on-street parking is going to go. Planning policy requires, and quotes, local planning authorities should give greater weight for residential applications to the potential adverse impacts likely to result from on-street parking when the design and layout of the street is unlikely to satisfactorily cope with additional residential parking pressures. And again, unallocated on-street space for parking can be counted for development, provided its use, quote, will not create obstruction or congestion for other road users. We are talking about streets in this area which are steep, with bends, with difficult junctions, heavy through traffic, including buses in some streets. Safety issues are already indicated there by the fact that this council is going to put double yellow lines in, more of them, and a pedestrian crossing. And into that area, we're going to have choked parking and cars circling, looking for spaces. That is bound to be likely to create safety problems. So, in summary, the figures for existing parking congestion are underplayed. The area is already saturated for significant periods. The estimate of parking demand from the development is too low for its users, and because fallback should be given little weight. And the design and layout of surrounding streets are unlikely to cope with additional parking without creating safety problems. As a result of that, much as I would like this development to save the church, I would like to propose that this committee refuses this planning application, and I have appropriate words for a reason for a refusal. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Do the officers want to come back on any of that?
I just would like to come back on the theoretical fallback position argument put forward by the councillor and point out it isn't theoretical at all, because Class D1, which is what a church falls within, includes uses such as gyms, creches, nursery schools, health clubs. If those uses were proposed in that building, we would have no planning control. They could go in there tomorrow. They would generate the uses and the car parking spaces requirement that we've talked about in the report. So it's not a theoretical situation. It's a situation that's recognised through planning decisions, through planning appeals. Any inspector that looks at this application, should it go to appeal, for example, his first port of call will be to look at what the existing use of this site is, specifically and more importantly, because the building is being retained, it will form really the bedrock of any parking requirement considerations he or she makes. Were the building to be demolished, that might change slightly, although a consideration will be given to what the previous parking requirement would have been for the previous use. However, if the building is being retained, it is fundamental, and there is an existing use in that building, and it can be put to an alternative use. So I just wanted to make sure that members were fully aware that it isn't a theoretical situation. It is a long-standing planning law decision that's taken right across the board on all sorts of planning decisions.
I understand entirely the use of the concept and that it is common and so on. However, I think the key word in what you said, Marcus, was if these uses came to pass. They aren't in existence now. There isn't a concrete proposal before us that they be in existence. So to that extent, they are theoretical. I think the key issue is due weight and what weight should be given to this calculation. And, you know, at the moment, it's not in use as a church. The streets, the parking associated with that use, they're not on the streets, so they don't appear in the figures for the survey. If they did, the figures in the survey would look a lot worse. That's the argument I'm making.
Can I come back with one analogy? It's not an identical analogy, but it's one that members should be aware of. Some of you may be aware of a situation that occurred some years ago with a quarry, where the decision was taken to allow houses to be built close to that quarry because it was just assumed it'll never be used again. What happened? The quarry was reopened, and the council suffered, and the residents suffered, years of explosions, damage, and what have you. And the decision was taken by not this council, I hasten to add, because it was before this council came into being. The decision was taken on the understanding that it's unlikely that it'll ever reopen. Now, we've got to be very, very careful making statements like, oh, it's not being used now, so it's unlikely that there'll ever be another parking requirement. Please be aware of that when you're making your decisions.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Clive Williams.
Someone got them on? No, you're on. CADU came under me on my department for 26 years. So I know the importance of looking after this building here. But this is happening throughout Wales, and we've got to live with this. What are we trying to do here tonight? We're trying to do 2 or 3 things. We're trying to crystallise here. We're trying to protect that main building. That's the first thing. We're then trying to sort out the planning. So it's clear to me that we should be protecting the church, the Sunday school, which is obviously built a long, long time later, because you wouldn't have had Sunday schools when that church was originally built. If this was my problem today, I would be protecting the main building. I'd be looking at whatever ground other buildings were on there, the ancillary buildings. I would be looking to take those buildings down and building a 2-storey building, as I mentioned to Councillor John earlier, so that we are not only providing parking for this development, we're actually relieving the area as well. Now, you know, if we can put a man on the moon, I'm sure we could, we could do this. So, is there any objection now? I can understand that the applicant is going to lose X amount of money by not being able to develop the Sunday school there, but clearly to me, you're protecting the churches, which is the main thing, and you're also providing the car parking, which everybody seems to be saying is such a problem in this area. Now, if you had a 2-storey building there, and I'm professionally qualified in this, this is feasible. Let me just tell you that, that's all. Anyway, that's all I'd like to say, Mr. Chair.
Marcus, do you want to come back?
I don't think, we're not saying it's not feasible. Anything's technically feasible. What we're saying is that it's not economically viable. So that's all the only point I'd make.
Thank you. It's Councillor Jeff James.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's quite obvious that many people who live in the area and around this particular area have real concerns about parking. But I'm also concerned that members know that we previously had a planning application in 2008 to demolish this building. And it was the wish of this committee that we actually refused that. Subsequently, an application came forward in 2000 later on, but that was also withdrawn. So it's clearly our intent to save that building. It's a county treasure. We can pick and mix which bit we knock down, but what worries me now is what Marcus says about viability. There's only one way that building is going to be saved, is if there's a scheme that's viable enough to pay to keep that building secure, pay for the infrastructure works to be done. And it seems to me that if we want that building saved, then we're never really going to have car parking. So I know that the residents are really annoyed about it and they're concerned about it, but in reality, everybody says we want to save the building, but we also want 100 car parking spaces. I think it's fairly obvious that we're not going to be able to achieve that. I'm really concerned by the points made by Vicky about viability. This scheme ticks all the boxes in terms of viability, doesn't deliver car parking, but it does save the building. And I think that we've got the report from our highways department, and we've got our highways officer with us. And on page 95, it seems to me pretty clear that our highways department are in favour of this application. They justify the fact that it has no parking on its site. And I think, therefore, that if we were to arbitrarily refuse this application, we've got no guarantee that this scheme would come forward again. Maybe they'd go to appeal. But I'm really concerned that we've got to work out here what is this committee's priority. If the priority is saving that building, then we have to go for a compromise that accepts that when the building was in full use, there were a lot of cars, and there's no car parking. But if we want the car park, I remember what Councillor Clive said, let's knock down a bit at the back. But of course, that is included in the county treasure. So in reality, and I know I'm going to be unpopular, but in reality, if it's the priority of this council and this committee that we retain that building in good order, this scheme seems to be the only one that's come before us so far that actually achieves all that. So I'm really concerned that members are talking about highway and car parking when we've got a report from our officers on page 95. And perhaps Mr. Clough would care to comment on why he feels that they've been able to make that recommendation, because clearly that is the key point for the residents. Why does highway feel that we don't need on-site car parking? But I think that we've got to be very, very careful, because it's clear that we can't have both. If we clear the site, we can get a scheme with car parking. If we want to retain the site, it's clear we can't have car parking for the reasons given by our officers, for the reasons given by the developer. So I'm really in that cleft stick of what is it that is our priority, and I'm afraid that our priority is protecting the heritage of Barry. And I really would invite our officers to comment on that, and perhaps Mr. Clough to confirm that that is the view of the Highways Department. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, over to our highways engineer.
Thank you. Mike Clogg, Operational Manager for Highways and Engineering. I think it's the comments from the highway team are explicit in the report. It's difficult for me to say an awful lot more. I recognise that there are some parking issues in the area, but from a planning context, as Marcus has quite clearly explained, the existing use of the building, which is approximately 30, which requires parking for approximately, or generates parking of approximately 34 vehicles, compared to what the proposed use would generate, which is approximately 38 vehicles, doesn't represent a material increase in the parking requirements, and therefore the Highways Department find it difficult to make an objection in terms of planning in relation to this application.
Does that answer your point? Thank you. I got Councillor Bronwyn Brooks.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I mean, living and using this area, I find there's a huge problem already with parking. And we're also talking about, you've got a high street there of shopping, which we're actually desperately trying to keep alive, which is doing very well, high streets. But people park around that area to actually use that area. So that it's going to exacerbate that issue about parking. There's also all the residential, all the streets around there as well, who often fight for spaces now, because obviously we want to keep High Street viable. So you've already got conflicts there as well. Now, what I would be interested to hear is, John mentioned that you had reasons, or relevant reasons that we could put forward for refusal. I'd actually like to hear those, because we are faced with a very difficult decision. I acknowledge what you say, Jeff, about keeping, the viability of this building, and it is a beautiful building. That goes without saying, and I don't think anybody's disagreeing with that. So, really, I would like to hear those reasons about whether they are viable and relevant reasons for refusal.
Do you want to, before I do that, I know Clive Williams wanted to come back on a point. Yeah, before we do that.
Yeah, I've been involved in planning for 60 years, and I will say that our planning department in the Vale of Glamorgan is second to none. So I think our officers are in a very difficult position here, looking at a scheme like this. Now, we've heard about the planning, the parking and all the other things there, and I sympathise with them having to look from two different directions at a time. What I feel with this there is that if we make a decision either way tonight, that's finite. And I really believe that with a bit more thought, we could get a better scheme put forward. And as I say, I'm convinced that you could get on-site parking. And on the other point there that we keep stressing there, that main building would have been built, in my estimation, sort of 1830s, 1840s, or whatever. I don't know, I'm guessing. But the Sunday school wouldn't have been in there till the early 19s. So that isn't a treasure, I don't think. So I can't understand why we can't look after the main church. And if we're now looking at the applicant who's bought this, he may have been given it because of you can buy churches cheaply today, you may be able to get grants or something there to assist this. All I want is to protect that church there and also to exacerbate the parking. So really what I'm hoping for is that we could get a better scheme in. I don't want to go against the officers because, but I would really hope that we could get a better scheme in, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. You didn't want to come back on that, did you, Marcus? No. Okay, John, would you like to... Yeah.
The proposal would generate substantial additional on-street parking in an area where demand for on-street parking already exceeds availability for significant periods of the day. New residents are likely to be encouraged to park in an antisocial manner by parking inappropriately, and cars manoeuvring to seek parking will be to the detriment of highway safety and the free flow of traffic along the adopted highway network, so having an unacceptable impact on the amenity and character of the area. The proposal would therefore be contrary to the aims and objectives of policies ENV 27, Design of New Developments, and Supplementary Planning Guidance on Parking Standards. The proposal fails to comply with policy House 8, number 2 of the Vale of Glamorgan UDP.
Okay. We'll ask you to hand that up. Is somebody seconding that as a motion? Councillor Chris Franks. So it's moved by John Drowser. Any other member? Otherwise I'm going to move to a vote. Because I think we've aired it for quite some time now. Okay.
Did you understand what he was reading, or do you want him to read that again? Okay?
Yeah.
It's not a
Sorry.
planning.
Yeah, it's been seconded, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, could I just, Clive, you put something forward about, I'm assuming you're on about deferring for it to be looked at again. Is that supported by anybody, just to sort of clarify that, really?
We asked the planning officers what their thoughts are. Do you think there is a very small chance that the developer may talk to us and negotiate with us?
I wouldn't want to prejudge what the developer's position is on this. We have brought this to committee after quite extensive negotiations and discussions ourselves, having been fully aware that this would be an issue that would be of some serious concern to members of the public. We've obviously demonstrated that we feel that it's very likely to be a problem in terms of development viability to do the sort of solutions to on-site parking that you've been talking about. We could defer the application for further discussions to come back next month and clarify that situation with a bit more information in terms of the costs of on-site provision and the viability of the development, and that may inform members further in terms of making a decision and protecting the future use of the building. I'm very happy to go away and do that if members feel that's something that you'd like to ask for.
Jonathan?
Chair, on that ground then, I think this is such an important application. And I think with something this important, we need to get it right for the sake of a month. could I ask that we defer this, Chair, and ask to go back to the applicants and see if there is any compromise, because I realise we're not going to get the full 36 or plus car parking spaces, but let's give it a month and try a little negotiation and see where we go. If it comes back to us in the same position next month, well, then we vote on it. But that's my proposal.
Well,
So if
I've had a
moving it, you're seconding that motion.
yeah. Okay, but I'll have to ask the mover of the first motion if he's happy about that. Whether he wants to read.
I would be very happy for further discussions with the developer to see what room for manoeuvre there is. However, the developer gets a free second shot at this anyway, and I would be happier. I mean, again, that seems to assume, a deferment assumes that actually it's going to be refused if we don't. I think we need to test that. I would prefer to put the vote for a refusal. The developer can still come back.
Okay then, I'll put the two. It's been moved and seconded as well for a deferment. So I'm going to ask those in favour of a refusal, please show.
Well,
I've got to put that after.
Yeah. This is refusal. Refusal, yeah. The officer's recommendation.
Yes. That's 4. Yeah. Right, that's a refusal of officer's recommendation. Those against that refusal, please show.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. No, I don't think that's clear.
Look, we're going to... will you be quiet, Margaret? What you've moved is we've asked John if he wanted to move the officer's recommendation for a refusal. So he's done that. Now we've got to vote against and then we're going to move for a deferment. Okay, that's correct.
All right.
Okay.
We're going to take the...
Yeah.
Approval.
Yes.
And he's now
moved
to refuse to go against the officers.
Yeah.
So we're going to vote for 4 people to support refusal.
Right.
The opposite to that is to reject the refusal.
We should have done the
Yes.
deferral first.
Yeah, I think you just need to make that clear, because I don't think that...
Yeah.
We should have done the deferral first.
I've just taken the legal advice. What we're going to do now is move for those members who want to defer this application. We've got a mover and a seconder. It's quite clear some people are happy about refusing it, but those who would like to defer it for further clarification with the developer to see if they can come back with car parking spaces, as I understand it. Yeah, okay. That's clearly carried, isn't it? I think the planning officer, Marcus Goldsworthy, would like to address committee now.
No, only to say that just to clarify that decision, it doesn't have to come back within a month if successful negotiations are taking place. That's just wanted to make sure that that was...
Yeah. Okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you to the members of the public. We'll move swiftly on now. Yes.
Yeah,
we've got 2 members outside.
Bring the 2 councillors in.
I still think we should have moved not refusing it. I still think we should have not refused it.
I will need that, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you had a move to refuse that was turned down.
Yeah. So now
the opposite, the opposite of that was to turn down, and then you'd have needed to approve. You'd have needed a so that was good. Yeah.
Yeah.
That worked quite
well, we got there in the end.
The problem is, I think you just
Yeah. I know. It's just going to have oops. Okay, next on the agenda is Crystal Springs. Are we all okay? This was subject to a site visit, and I know there are some late representations. I think, is this being delivered by Marcus or Victoria? Victoria is going to deliver it for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to advise members of the late representations, we've had an email from councillors Neil and Anne Moore objecting to the proposal, which is attached to the late representations. Some of their concerns to do with the increased provision of the size of the care home that we're talking about, the impact on parking and so on. And comments just to confirm that the highway officer has confirmed that he has no objection to the scheme in terms of the parking and access arrangements on site.
Okay.
Sorry, shall I just briefly outline what the scheme is?
Yes, if you would, please.
Chair, thank you. Just to confirm, this members will recall that we did have previous approval for a care home on this site. This is now to increase the size of that care home. It was 50 beds, it's now 71 beds, so 21 more than what was previously approved. That does increase the size of the building and the bulk of the building, although there have been some extensive negotiations on that to try and minimise the visual impact and bulk of the development. The height, as is outlined in the report, doesn't increase significantly beyond what was previously approved. A lot of the extra accommodation is in the roof and particularly at the back of the development. If I can bring the plans up. So this is the front elevation and the side elevation that we're looking at here. This on the back is where you can see the bulk of the additional accommodation is being provided in the roof. If I can use my little pointer. There we go. So we've got 4 stories essentially at the back. Those that were on site today would have seen that actually there's a little pathway to the side of the application site where you can where you'd be able to appreciate that additional visual bulk, if you like, but it is largely screened by vegetation and the existing cliff face and the difference in levels there. So we've come to the view that the differences between the previously approved scheme and this scheme are not so significant as to cause us concerns in terms of the impact on the conservation area or the visual impact of the development. Other concerns would be to do with the intensification of the use of the site for the additional bed spaces, but as I've advised, the parking provision is considered to be sufficient for the staff and visitors associated with this type of use, and obviously the residents you wouldn't necessarily expect to have a car parked on site, the site. So there is no objection from the highway officers as confirmed in the late representations.
Okay, thank you for that, Victoria. It was subject to a site visit. Many members looked at it this morning. Any member would like to speak on it? Otherwise, I'm going to go for a vote. Second. Okay. It's been moved and second. Those in favour of officer's recommendation, please show. Okay, those against? 3. Any abstentions? 4? Did I see 4? 4. 5. Is Val voting against? You're abstaining. Okay then, that's clearly carried. Thanks for that. We move on to 8 Francis Road in Barry, which is subject to late representations. Also, it had a site visit earlier on today. And thanks for turning up, although we got a bit wet. I'll ask the officer who's going to deal with this one. Marcus?
I'll do that one.
Okay, for a change.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, and we do, before you do say anything, Marcus, we do have a speaker against. I think it's the gentleman sitting directly in front of me. I don't know whether you want to go up on the stand or whether you want to speak from there. It's up to you. Or use this microphone here. You okay going up there? Yeah, okay then, when you're ready, and we'll ask the officer to address us.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is an application for a two-storey side extension and single-storey rear extension. As you quite rightly pointed out, there are late representations from neighbouring properties at 6 Francis Road and 10 Francis Road. Those are in the bundle before you. The proposals are for a side extension which is set back from the frontage of the main frontage of the property. One point of clarification, it's only a minor point. The report does refer to a two-storey side extension. Obviously, it's a bungalow with accommodation in the attic. We normally refer to that as 1.5 storey, but it is obviously accommodation above ground floor. There is also a large single-storey extension proposed to the rear. By way of a bit of history, you will see on page 184 there have been previous refusals, recent refusals for developments at this property. And what the applicant has done is take account of those refusals and attempted to overcome them by amending their scheme. Those amendments include reducing the width of the extension and setting the extension back from the frontage of the property. So on that basis, your officers have recommended approval.
Thank you for that. I think it's Mr. Phil Jones, isn't it? Yeah. Would you like to put your microphone on, Mr. Jones? And then we can hear you. You do have 3 minutes, so take your time and speak when you're ready. Okay?
Yes, thank you. I'll start with point 1, seems the right place to start. Titled Terracing and Infilling.
Could you pull the mic closer to you?
Of course.
Yeah, would you like to start again?
How's that? Does it sound better?
And then we won't knock any time off you. Okay, fine.
Okay. Right. We do not believe that the question of the terracing has been entirely eradicated, given the shape, size and projected build of the side extension proposed. This is clearly developed with a tapering side wall moving ever closer to our boundary, reaching the boundary at the point where it joins the new proposed rear extension. Although it has been stepped back by a very small amount at the front elevation, we do not acknowledge that this is sufficient to avoid the issue of infilling. We are also concerned that the proposed side extension appears to exceed the acceptable height as far as we can determine. This side extension represents, in our opinion, terracing to all intents and purposes, and if repeated along the street would certainly serve to create a terracing effect. This planned development will have an abiding impact on the surrounding environment. Point 2, rear extension. No more than half of the area of land around the original house can be covered by additions or other buildings. That's quote 1. The overall length, breadth and height of the proposed rear extension is such as to almost completely overwhelm the upper part of our neighbour's rear garden. There is very little doubt that this proposed build will prove not only claustrophobic, but overbearing and will overshadow our garden significantly. The physical height of the roof pitch at the apex has been considerably increased, and yet the suggested dormer window still remains in place. While the roof itself runs down almost to the boundary with our garden, and at the other end to that of number 6 Francis Road. The issue of maintenance and cleaning will be problematic without unwelcome access to the adjacent properties. Point 3, right to light issues. We recognise that the question of right to light can be difficult to determine, although we do not see any difficulties here, given that the first application by the applicant, about 10 months ago, failed and was refused in part by reason of loss of light. We cannot see how there is any less of an impact from the proposals for both the side and rear extensions in the latest planning application, which are in many ways broader, wider and taller in design, although slightly hidden by a paucity of accurate measurements. We have for this application attempted to show the potential impact of light at our property by virtue of a series of photographs. We apologise that financial constraints mean that photographs are not available to all the members, but there are possibly 3 sets in circulation at this committee.
Can you wrap it up, please?
I can leave it there.
Okay, fine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I've seen a number of photographs, I have to say. I don't know about other members, but I've seen quite a few of your photographs, if that helps. Are there any points of clarification from members before I ask the officer to speak? I don't know whether, Mr. Jones, after you want to go back and sit in your seat, but I'll just ask members first before you do. Anybody would like to ask anything that's to be clarified? It doesn't appear so, Mr. Jones, so would you like to come back and take your seat? And I'm going to ask the officer to come back on the points that you've mentioned. Thank you. Okay, Marcus.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to clarify, the extension has been reduced in all regards in respect of what we have before us now compared to the previous refusals. Your officers have made the assessment, and it is a subjective assessment, but that this proposal will not lead to terracing because of the setback of 0.7 metres and the reduction in the width of the extension at the side. The extension to the rear is not considered to be overbearing now on either neighbouring property, being single storey and being a relatively low-lying roof. Right to light was raised. Now, this is a difficult issue, but right to light is not a planning issue. It's a separate issue under civil law and a matter for private individuals. It is relevant that the first reason for refusal did refer to overshadowing caused by the original scheme. Your officers have looked at this current scheme and believe that there is no shadowing or negative effect from the scheme, or certainly not enough to warrant refusal of the planning application. So I think that covers everything.
Okay. Any member would like to raise... the local members, Councillor Margaret Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't be supporting this application. I'm going against the officer's recommendation because I believe this is going to impact on the two neighbours. It's not only with the light, we know that is not a planning application, but what concerns me is them keeping, how are they going to keep this new building at the back of it and at the side, how are they going to keep it up to date with all the repairs or anything like that, because they'd have to go on to the neighbours' properties, and I know that you'll say then I'll have to go to court and it'll be all that. But what concerns me, then there would be a dispute between neighbours. I will not be supporting this application.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Drysdale.
I just wanted to ask the planning officer, Mr. Jones mentioned about the area of ground that the extensions covered compared to the area of the existing dwelling and the size of the plot. Can you tell us what the situation is on that?
There's no specific policy that prevents it, but the plans do show there we are. We can see the boundaries there. There is still sufficient amenity space to accord with our amenity standards, so that's pretty much all I can advise.
Okay. Any other member? Okay. The officer has put his recommendation forward. Those in favour of the officer... Oh, right, okay. We haven't had a proposer or seconder. You're moving it, are you, Councillor Gwyn Roberts? Have we got a seconder? Councillor Peter King. There you are. So it's moved and seconded. Yeah. Yeah. Those in favour of the officer's recommendation, please show. (13) Okay. Those against? Yes. Can you turn your mic on? Because then
Yep.
CCTV will
Yeah,
pick you up.
given the importance of size and impact, I think it would be reasonable that we remove permitted development rights, so any extension would have to come back to the planning committee.
Because this is an application for an extension to an existing property, it would be, you couldn't do it. But just to add to that, it's extremely unlikely that, given this extension, that an additional extension could be made without requiring planning permission.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't. Yeah, I didn't. Did we go those against? Did you manage to catch all the? Yeah. You did. So any abstentions? Okay, well, that's clearly carried. Thank you. So we move on to the land at the former bus depot on site at Tinnerrodin in the Wenvo. It's on page 210. I think that's subject to late reps, is it, Marcus? No, there's no late reps on that. But it was a previous site visit. This application's back before us with some amendments. So I'll ask Marcus to lead on it.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. I'll just go through what the application is for. It's for the demolition of the existing buildings on the site and the redevelopment for 15 affordable residential units and associated car parking, landscaping, infrastructure and other ancillary development. The proposal will lead to 9 two-bedroom houses and 6 one-bedroom flats, all to be let as affordable accommodation by Newith Housing Association. This application has come back to you following a previous decision to refuse. The actual scheme is pretty much identical to what was considered by you previously. The big difference is that the developer has decided to undertake further traffic assessments before resubmitting the application to look at an issue that was raised in respect of access to land to the rear, agricultural land to the rear, and there is was a drainage issue which was raised, and that has been dealt with by the applicant in their submissions. So essentially, this application is pretty much identical to the previous application. As I say, the applicant has attempted to show the nature of the road which passes it, which was primarily the concerns which led to the refusal of the previous scheme. In doing that, they have shown that the road is relatively lightly trafficked, and that there is an average speed which they identify in the report is 34 miles an hour, I believe, in the report. 38 is it? Past the site. It isn't a restricted road, though. It's a country road without a restriction. Yeah, so that's not in breach of the speed limit. Obviously, the report goes through the various policy situations that surround this site. It is in a green wedge, for example, which would normally preclude it, except the policy does advise that in respect of affordable housing schemes, the green wedge criteria can be overridden. It is outside of a settlement boundary, but obviously, and it does not accord with the exemption policy set out in the unitary development plan. However, the material considerations of the site being brownfield, having a previous use, the demand for affordable housing in the area, and the quality of the scheme have led your officers to recommend approval once again for it. That has had regard to our colleagues in housing who have shown a demonstrable need for that housing in the area. One point that does need to be taken into account, I'm sure it was last time, but the applicant has agreed to pay a sustainable transport contribution of £30,000, which will be used in the area. They've also agreed to pay a contribution of £12,000 for contributing to public open space, and I believe an area of public open space has been identified which could be used and upgraded. And they have also advised that they are willing to consider traffic calming measures along the road. And those traffic calming measures would fall outside of the £30,000 that they'd pay for sustainable transport contributions, and there is in fact a condition, proposed condition 3 on the consent dealing with that traffic calming, which would seek to reduce speeds and make it safer for cyclists and pedestrians should they choose to use that road. Ultimately, I think, as your officers have have said in the report, it is a balanced decision, but we do feel that the need for affordable housing and the work that has been done by the applicant to justify that in terms of the road, the traffic speeds and the usage of the road mean that we have to maintain our recommendation for approval.
Okay, before I ask the local member to come in, and Councillor Hodges is biting at the teeth to have a go at this. We've got somebody who wants to speak in favour of the... So would you... It's Mr Griffiths, isn't it? Thank you. Would you like to come up into the hot seat, Mr Griffiths? You have 3 minutes, and when you've settled down, turn your light on and start speaking. Thank you. Yeah, fine.
Good evening, Chairman, members, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Owen Griffiths of GVA, and I'm the agent for this application. The previous application was refused against your planning officer's recommendation on the grounds of highway safety. We have since worked closely with your officers to address the concerns previously raised, resulting in the revised application before you today and the positive recommendation to grant permission. Primarily, the differences are the enhanced drainage infrastructure at the site entrance to alleviate existing problems of surface water runoff and icing. Legal confirmation of the rights of access to the adjacent agricultural land, and the submission of additional supporting highways information, including the results of the traffic surveys. Other than the enhanced drainage, no other physical changes to the scheme have been proposed, as they were simply not required. The Council's Highway Department agreed the scope of the traffic surveys, including the precise location of traffic counters, survey cameras, and the dates of the surveys. The revised transport statement and rebuttal to highways finds the following. Vehicle speeds and daily traffic flows are relatively low and the highway operates safely. The average vehicle speed recorded was just 30 miles per hour, with an 85th percentile speed of 36 miles an hour, in spite of the speed limit being 60 miles per hour on St Lythans Road. Recorded evidence that people walk and cycle along St Lythans Road from the site to Culverhouse Cross, which is no surprise as it's promoted by the council as a cycle route. No recorded accidents in proximity of the site over the past 5 years, including none involving pedestrians and cyclists. Highways are not able to object on the grounds of the site access due to the existing use of the site. This includes visibility displays, and highway safety for pedestrians and cyclists will be improved by virtue of the development, as there will be fewer commercial vehicles and less traffic movements associated with the use when compared with the lawful use. It follows that if there's no traffic increase, then there can be no detrimental impact. As we've heard, the applicant has agreed to pay financial contributions towards sustainable transport, open space and public art, together with the offer of traffic calming measures. In summary, the proposals meet 2 of the key objectives of the planning system. Redundant brownfield land will be brought back into a sustainable, appropriate use, with the proposals directly responding to a demonstrated acute need for affordable housing, rural affordable housing in the Vale. The green wedge and landscape designations affecting the wider area will not be compromised by the development of the site, which is currently an eyesore. The scheme put forward is well designed and attractive, providing a high quality rural affording housing scheme in an appropriate location. We would therefore urge members to trust your planning officer's judgment and recommendation to grant planning permission for this much needed development. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much.
Gosh, that was well timed. You've rehearsed that well.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr Griffiths, I'll ask members at points of clarification if they'd like to ask one, and I can see Bob Penrose is eager. Bob.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like clarification on 2 points. In the statement, it was made that there are no accidents. I've had a local resident who approached me to say they've had cars in the last 12 months hit their boundary walls on 2 occasions, and I wonder how we got a no accident there. And the 30-mile-an-hour average, bearing in mind, and I don't know the actual grade, and I'm looking towards the local member, but could we have a breakdown of the average, because the downhill speeds must be a lot faster than the uphill speeds there because of the steepness of the road, you know.
It's limited by the corners and everything.
Is he asking him or him?
Yeah. Perhaps Mr Griffiths can answer that.
Thank you, Councillor. We state that there have been no recorded incidents along this highway. There may well be information to the contrary, but unless they're reported, we can't say otherwise. So we're going on recorded information, which is factual information that we're provided with. So apart from that, we can't comment on any other information that's given by members. And unless they're recorded, then they're not referred to in factual information. So in the past 5 years, there are no recorded accidents along this stretch of road.
Okay. Anybody else? Councillor Bird.
You mentioned in your statement that it was part of the Vale of Glamorgan cycle route. Could you explain to me which part of the Vale of Glamorgan cycle route it comes on?
It's referred to on the council's website with a link to a website which promotes cycle routes in the Vale, and this is one of them. We're merely stating that the council themselves are promoting this as a cycle route, and there's a link on their website to that information. We can't dispute that.
Okay. Any other member? No? Okay. Would you like to step down? Yeah, you're now released. Marcus has the opportunity to come back and say anything that he wants at this point. Any clarification? Nothing to add. There we are. We'll open up the debate, and Councillor Bird was first.
Thank you, Chair. As I'm sure you'll all remember, this was not so very long ago. We were on site, and we all witnessed that it would be impossible to do faster than 30 mile an hour, even if you were pretty much a rally driver, due to the proximity, the slope, and the bends. I would refer to, I appreciate the work that's been done, and they have answered some of the questions, but the main and still is the burning issue on that site is that pedestrian access to Culverhouse Cross is dangerous, to say the least. I would not let any child of mine walk there, day or night. It is unlit, unsafe, overgrown, and traffic calming would just exacerbate that. What I feel the developers should have done was look to purchase a strip of land to allow a pedestrian route down to Culverhouse Cross, avoiding walking down that. And I live there, I use that road every day. It is a very dangerous road, and Councillor Penrose is right. There are regular accidents. They might not be reported to the police, but there are regular accidents on that road. I just can't believe, I mean, we've requested the hedges be cut back time and time again. Official letters have been sent out from highways to the landowners, and we still get no work done. It's dangerous as it is to put another 16 dwellings there, which are affordable houses. They need to be sustainable, as we're told under the planning rules and guidance. So therefore, walking to and from, which is only a short distance, Culverhouse Cross, where pretty much every amenity you could want is there, but you know, they need some form of an upgrade or a dedicated footpath before I'm happy with it. I certainly wouldn't ask anybody to walk down that road day or night. It is very dangerous, and therefore I will be recommending that we do not support the officer's recommendation and refuse this planning.
You got a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Penrose. Okay then, any other member? Councillor Hodges had his hand up first.
Thank you, Chairman. Nice to be back in the room. For myself, I remember this, and it was incredibly recently when we turned this down before. It's still within the Green Wedge. It's still within a special landscape area. It's still dangerous. I am concerned about kids and young families walking along this path. But I don't see that much difference from the previous application to this. But I'm in a bit of a quandary. And on Monday this week, I attended Cabinet. And there was a very good discussion.
and a very good decision made on affordable housing. And it said basically where our partner housing associations want to provide us with good affordable housing in units ranging from 1 to 25, that to encourage them, help them and aid them, we would waive 106. I thought that was an excellent decision. This is 15, so it's within the range of 1 to 25. But I see now that tonight I'm being offered £42,000 in 106 that wasn't there before. And I'm wondering, is this the only significant difference from the previous decision that we made here not so very long ago? I still think it's dangerous, and I'm voting against it, Chairman.
Thank you. Yeah. Before I ask others, I think Mark Scosworthy should come in and explain what those differences are.
Councillor Hodges is quite correct. There was a report put to Cabinet on Monday. Procedurally, I think we should be corrected here that actually does not take effect until the period for calling has gone, and that hasn't. But secondly, that report actually didn't just carte blanche say all affordable schemes don't have to pay Section 106. What it did say is that where there were essential requirements, then they would still be looked at. So, for example, it could be argued in this case that the sustainable transport contribution, given its location, is an essential requirement. I would add that probably the open space contribution may not be, but the developer has been willing to maintain that contribution in this case. And indeed, they did on the previous application, so it's worth noting that that isn't a change from this application. Ultimately, there will be cases where we will, even when the policy change comes in, where below 25 affordable houses, we will not be seeking the normal Section 106 requirements. There will be situations where we will still seek some requirement, some contribution, be it for perhaps traffic issues, be it for perhaps sustainable transport issues. But in this particular case, as I've said, the developer has gone through that argument with us and has maintained their contribution.
Okay. Councillor John Drysdale.
Thank you. Planning deals with very difficult issues, and it's full of rules and regulations, most of which are fine, but occasionally I despair that common sense has gone out the window. This is a site in the Green Wedge. It's got houses on 4 sides, and it's a brownfield commercial site. And then we talk about having to walk 400 metres to Culverhouse Cross. And unfortunately, in our modern society, for a lot of people, that is completely out of court. But it does make me despair. And we're talking about separately the question of the safety of the road. And yes, I wouldn't say it's dangerous. It's a road on which you have to be careful. I don't think anybody here is talking about relocating all of the residents of Tuanerodin because that bit of road shouldn't be walked on because it's too dangerous. You know, those people are walking that road. A very much larger number than are going to be living in these houses. Yes, the residents of this new development would have to be careful, but there is no reason why they shouldn't be. Walk on the right side, correct side of the road. You know, if it's at night, wear vis jackets, carry a lamp. Speaking as a cyclist who has once or twice cycled up St Livens Road, I don't think any traffic passed me in the time I was going along. You know, I'm sure it has moments, but a lot of the time it's fairly quiet. You know, this is doable. It is just not common sense to say that, you know, people can't walk down a country lane. Most of the Vale is walking down country lanes day in, day out. From the point of view of when I read the report here, I remember the site visit, and the concerns that were mainly raised were about the drainage, the visibility at the access, about the access to the fields at the back. And I think the developer has dealt with the drainage situation. We can solve that. It seems to have gone off the agenda, and I don't think we should be over-egging the case about safety on the road. We should just be talking about care. I would like to see the approval of this development.
Okay. I've got Councillor Andrew Parker next.
Thank you, Chair. I was swayed considerably by the highway objection last time to actually move refusal. I genuinely cannot see any great change in the highway objection, and in fact, the highway department clearly sustained the objection. It would be very helpful, I think, if our highways officer went through the format that he raised last time, which actually convinced 13 people on this committee to refuse the application, or 10 and 3 abstentions. Sorry, I'll be correct.
Okay. Mike.
Okay, thank you. I'll try and summarise as best I can. First of all, I'd like to say that the traffic survey in no way provides any mitigation to the safety concerns that we've previously raised, so I don't think the situation has been moved on at all. Secondly, I'd like to dispel some of the comments that have been made in respect of speed. I think a speed of 30 mile an hour was mentioned by the applicant or the applicant's agent. That's an average speed along the road. The surveys actually indicate that the 85th percentile speed northbound is 38 miles per hour. And obviously it's in a de-restricted zone, so it's not breaking the speed limit, but that's the 85th percentile speed. Some speeds are liable to be higher than that. Yes, the traffic flows are relatively low, but the survey concludes that the daily the speeds are relatively low as well. Well, they're relatively low for a de-restricted speed limit. If you're looking at a road where you would expect pedestrians to use that highway, then 38 mile per hour, 85th percentile is certainly not low at all. In my opinion, the road is not safe for people to use for this development. People do use the road at the moment. However, what we're asking people to do for the sustainable development is that they use the road in all weathers and all conditions, including during the dark, with no street lighting, with vehicles moving past at potentially 38 miles an hour. That, in my opinion, is unsafe. People may well use it in daylight hours and in good conditions at the present moment in time, and they may be able to do so safely. I would not consider it safe to use when the conditions are poor. I'd also like to say that, you know, above 30 mile an hour, the risk of fatalities in the event of a collision increases rapidly, between 3.5 to 5.5 times greater when you increase from 30 to 40 mile an hour. So the risk to pedestrians using this road in all weathers and conditions is real, and the highway department has significant concerns, significantly enough to object to the proposals, and I think that summarises our case fairly well. Thank you.
I'll take the ones who've already had their hands up and spoke, but I'll go quick. Bob Penrose first.
He wants to just come back on a comment.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you for that. We've heard that they've suggested traffic calming measures. I would welcome your view on whether or not, one, if they actually are put in place, but two, do you think that would have any significant change to the view that you've already expressed?
It is going to be difficult to answer that because without seeing the terms of any traffic calming scheme, I'm unaware of how effective that may be in reducing traffic speed. So until something is put forward as a mitigation, to perhaps try and reduce speed along that part of the highway. I think I probably can't really answer your question appropriately, but I think from a highways point of view, I think we would certainly prefer to see a footway and lighting option to ensure the safety of pedestrians who may or who will undoubtedly, because of the sustainable development proposal, be required to use this particular road in all weathers and conditions.
Okay, Councillor Bob Penrose. Yeah, I think the officer just wants to...
Just quickly on that point, it is worth noting that firstly, while street lighting would be obviously beneficial from a safety point of view, street lighting may not be beneficial from a countryside protection point of view. And while we're all here, we're all aware of this, we have to balance these things as well. And there is a case to answer that even if it could be provided, we may not want traditional street lighting there because it's location in a green wedge and because of the rural location. So while obviously highway engineers have different requirements necessarily to planners, it's important to note that as a planner, we wouldn't necessarily want that. The other point I just want to quickly come across in terms of the mention of footpaths and pavements on other land, that has actually been explored by the applicant, and the costs are prohibitive. I mean, the scheme could not be undertaken if that was provided. So we do have to take that into account as well.
Okay, Councillor Penrose.
Thank you. There are 2 points. The first one, Councillor Parker has beat me to the punch on by mentioning our Highways Department's objection. The other thing is to dispel what Councillor Drysdale said. I lived locally to that for 7 years, and I know that during peak traffic times, that road is used as a rat run from people from Bombleston, St Nicholas, Dufferin, making a shortcut through to miss Culverhouse Cross. That situation with extra houses being at Culverhouse Cross is not going to get better. I cycle, and I have cycled it, but I certainly wouldn't do it in the rush hour.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'll take... No, Bronwyn was next, so I'll take Bronwyn.
Thank you, Chair. I find it quite astounding that the Highways officer has attended again to bring up the same points, but actually contradicting yourself as well. You actually stated that residents are actually using this lane already. So my question is, have there been any accidents with the residents who already use it for years?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. I think what I stated was that yes, persons are using the lane at the moment, but I suspect they use it in good conditions when they feel safe to do so. What we'll be doing in providing a sustainable development which expects people to use local transport as opposed to the car is making people or expecting people to walk along the highway in question in all hours, during all weathers, at night when it's dark, and whilst people can walk along the road during the summer months, during the winter months when we've got the longer hours, it will be more difficult.
Okay, I've got Councillor Peter King and then Councillor Anthony Powell.
Thank you, Chair. I've listened to the debate, and what I'm struggling with is the idea that if this is intended as affordable housing, the likely residents and therefore the potential for greater use of pedestrian use along this route. I hear there's been various proposals put forward by the developer that would perhaps mitigate some of that. I heard that the highways officer was unable to answer whether he felt that would help matters because it wasn't clear what they may be. I hear the argument about it's a rural area and therefore you don't perhaps want it floodlit. I just think to myself, maybe we need to explore the whole idea of the Section 106 and those mitigating circumstances, And I'm going to suggest that, as we did earlier, I'm going to ask, could this be deferred to allow our planners, our highways, and the developer to explore that? Because then maybe the highways officer is going to come back and say, if this was done and that was possible, then I think we may feel a little bit better. And so I'm proposing that we ask for a deferral to allow that sort of discussion to take place.
Can I add that I understand the developer has tried to speak to the highways officers about an amended scheme and traffic calming, but they were reluctant to do so while the application was before them. So it is a little bit difficult. It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. It is a situation where we have recommended a condition which would deal with that, because it would prevent any of the houses being occupied until a satisfactory scheme was provided and on site. So that should not hold up the development if it can be provided.
With respect, I'm new to planning, but my guess is that then that deferral would allow some of that to take place?
That would depend on highways colleagues actually negotiating. I'm not going to speak for my highways colleague, but obviously the developer has tried to do that already.
Yeah. Well, I know Councillor Anthony Powell has had his arm up, so if we take him next, and Councillor John Drysdale.
Thank you, Chair. It's a difficult one because it's affordable housing, which we're desperate for in the Vale of Glamorgan, and I do have that in my mind, but I don't like what I've heard about the fact that this is a narrow country lane. It's affordable housing, which suggests that there's going to be children that are going to need to go to school in those houses, and the traffic that there are in the lanes are travelling at over 30 mile an hour, 85%. The percentile, 85% are travelling over 30 mile an hour, which could mean the difference between life and death if there was an accident. I've also heard that there hasn't been any reported accidents there in the last 5 years, but then I've heard that at the moment the residents are turning and not walking the road. I've also heard that at peak traffic times it's used as a rat run, and that has brought me to my question, because I would have seconded Councillor King's recommendation for the deferral, because at the moment I'm minded to vote against this, and a deferral seems like a reasonable way forward. But this view that at peak times it's used as a rat run, or whatever you call it. So the question I have, it says in the highways report that traffic flows of 946 vehicles two-way have also been recorded, but it doesn't say, and you know, forgive me if I've missed it somewhere, but over what period of time were 946 vehicles recorded, because especially if it's being used as a rat run.
Okay, we'll ask the traffic officer if he knows that. Mike?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that question. I don't have that information with me, I'm afraid.
If I can come back, that piece of information there is of no value because it can't be measured. It just says 946 vehicles have been recorded. Is that in a 12 month? 2 years? 2 weeks? I haven't got a clue.
Okay, I'll ask the planning officer.
With the greatest respect, questions like that of a very technical nature, it is useful if we can have the information beforehand. We haven't actually got it in front of us, so we can't give you that. That information is there. It's been fully assessed by highways colleagues. They just don't have it to their fingertips. So,
okay, Councillor John Drysdale.
There's a question for the planning officers.
Right.
Given that we can only require developers to mitigate the direct impacts of their development, are we actually in a position to say you've got to create a new footpath all the way from Turnerod to Culverhouse Cross? It seems to be beyond. And sorry, a second point while I'm speaking. I think we should just beware of over-sensationalising the risk on this road. It was kind of painting a picture of you know, small kiddies going out in all weathers at all times of the day and night. You know, why don't we assume that the new residents will be at least as sensible as the current residents of Two and Rodin?
Yeah. Okay. I think Peter King wanted to.
Can I just come back on Councillor Drysdale's comments very quickly? The issue of the pavement it is a matter for the developer, if they wish to. You're quite correct. And usually under planning legislation, we would look for them to mitigate, if it was necessary, the harm that their scheme would generate. That may be a pavement the full length, but it's unlikely to be, and we would have to weigh that up with all requests of developers against the viability of doing so on the scheme as a whole, because it's clearly, if we require it and it can't be provided because the costs are too great, then that makes the scheme unviable in any event. So the other really quick point to make is that obviously, yes, it is off country lanes. If you live in the Vale of Glamorgan, pretty much everywhere you live outside of Barry and Penarth and Dinas Powys is off country lanes, and they are very similar in nature everywhere you go, and there are many houses off those country lanes. So while I do completely understand the comments of the highway engineer, I think it's relevant to say that an element of realism does have to come in.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Peter King.
Thanks, Chair. That's why I wasn't trying to be prescriptive about what those mitigating measures may be. I was really just suggesting the deferral to allow the highways people to have a look at that side of things, especially if they've not been able to for whatever reason before now. And I think then that would allow them to answer some of the questions that may help us all form a view.
Councillor Liz Burnett.
Thank you, Chair. This has been an interesting meeting because virtually every application has been a balancing act of consideration of what we're aiming to achieve versus the challenges of the actual application. Earlier we discussed at great length our desire to see a county treasure preserved, yet with it being within a couple hundred yards of some of the best bus services and a train route, the view was taken that everybody would be in their cars. And in this one, in a rural environment where every house has 2 car parking spaces, we assume that everyone's going to be walking down the road in the middle of the night. Well, there's an element of, as we've heard, a bit of an element of reality. I mean, a lot of us spend time, in rural environments. Some of us live there. I don't. Where you make choices about your mode of travel according to the situation and whether or not you're going to be walking up and down country lanes, or whether you're actually going to use a car, or whether you're going to use public transport if it's there. On this, in terms of that balancing act, I would argue that our need for affordable housing and the mitigation that's being offered is sufficient to say that this application should now be supported, and I will be supporting this application.
Thank you for that. I saw Nick Hodges' hand go up.
It's a simple point, Chairman. On the deferment to a mitigation traffic safety access scheme to come in, we turned this down in April. They've made a new application. Without that, this was turned down because it didn't have that. Yet we're now being asked to defer it so that they may come up with it. Surely if you make an application, a new application on something that's been turned down for a very strong a reason, you think that that would have come forward in a new application without having then for us to defer. I mean, as I said, the only difference I can see is £42,000. Am I bought for £42,000? No. I will be voting against it.
I think the officer is going to tell you there's a bit more to it than that.
Well, that's all I can see, Chairman.
There's no change. The £42,000 proposed last time as well.
No, there wasn't. Yeah.
There's no change. The 42,000 was there.
Yes. Yeah. So that's not true. Okay, you wanted to come back then, Jonathan?
Thank you, Chair. I'm sitting here getting very frustrated and very wound up because I feel very strongly about this, and I agree that we are desperate for affordable housing, especially in rural locations. And this would be a very good scheme if it had some safe pedestrian access, which I can't accept is making the scheme unviable to provide. There are agricultural fields both sides of that lane. There is a public footpath within a few hundred yards which goes to Culverhouse Cross, and I just can't accept that £50,000 or £60,000 wouldn't provide a safe route. You could light it with low-level lighting to provide safety for the users and not to give light pollution to the environment. There are solutions to this. I'm afraid safety takes precedent in my eyes. It should be sustainable. We are encouraging people to cycle and walk to school. This encourages people to not leave their house, but to jump in a car. They are landlocked there. Now, please, either insist that this comes back with some decent and safe pedestrian access, not just road calming, because that won't do it, or let's refuse it once and for all.
Okay. I've had it moved and second for a deferral, so that's what I'm going to take first. So those in favour of a deferral, please show. Seven. Okay. Those against that deferral? Okay. Any abstentions? One. Thank you. It's been moved and seconded for refusal. Those in favour of refusal? Yeah. Bob Penrose.
Second, but we have
Hold
reasons.
on.
We've got to have reasons.
Yeah. Have you got? Yeah. Please.
Yes, please.
Due to its location, served from an unrestricted rural lane, the site does not have safe access for pedestrians or cyclists, and such represents an unsustainable development, contrary to Planning Policy Wales, TAN 18, and Policies 2, ENB 27 of the Vale of Glamorgan Adopted Unitary Development Plan, 1996 to 2011.
Okay. You've got your reasons. Thank you. We hand those over to the officer after. Yeah. Oh, it's the same reason as before. Oh, right. There you are then. Okay then. It's been moved and seconded. I know Jonathan moved it. Councillor Bob Penrose seconded it. Those in favour of refusal, please show. Those against the refusal, please show. How many? 8. It's refused then. Yeah. Any abstentions? Just to... No.
Yeah.
2 abstentions. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Land at Cook Road, Francis Road, Barry on page 259 was subject to a site visit today for 3 dwellings. First council house to be built for many a year, but I'll ask Marcus to lead us through it. Yes, okay then. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Marcus.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is an application for 3 affordable social rented dwellings with parking and associated works. That's the description. They are actually going to be built by the council themselves.
Yeah.
They are in a best description, I suppose, a terrace, but they are obviously bungalow properties. The plan on page 260 does show the layout, as does the plan on the screen. Your officers have assessed the proposals and consider that meet all the relevant standards and are recommending approval.
Okay, Thank you for that. Councillor Bob Penrose had his hand up.
I'd like to
And
move
Jonathan.
accepting officers' recommendations, please.
Sorry?
Bronwyn and Jonathan.
Well, only two can move and second it, and we've got them. You're the local member. Did you want to speak on it?
No, I'm quite happy. I'm waiting for it to start.
Okay. Yes? Okay.
As you said, Chair, the first council housing to be built in 30, 40 years, by us anyway. And I'm delighted to see this come in. I'm even more delighted to see their bungalows designed for the use of a disabled person within the household, not necessarily of age or whatever. It could be a young child. But this type of property is desperately short in the Vale of Glamorgan. I hope to see more of it in the near future, and I wish our council good luck in getting this gone. They'll have no problem letting them out, I'm sure, but it just brings a big heart. You know, it's a brilliant scheme.
Okay. Bronwyn, you want to say something?
I would like to speak, yeah. This
Right.
is I brought it forward, Jonathan, thank you. Thank you. I mean, I am absolutely delighted this is for us today. I think I would just like to clarify. I know some of the some residents did have a couple of concerns about possible drug use by occupiers. It's just really to clarify that these bungalows are for children with life-limiting conditions, and that is all they'll ever be used for. Those type of residents. So really, just offer a bit of reassurance for residents as well. The scheme has been very, very carefully thought around, and these bungalows will be specifically adapted for those children. So I'm absolutely delighted this is here with us today.
A good news story.
And I thank everybody for their support.
Okay, those in favour of the recommendation by officers, please show. Well, that's unanimous, clearly. Yeah, thank you for that. And I wish you all a good night, and I'll see you at the next planning meeting.